Hi guys, sorry to inflict this upon you, but I had to respond. So Nigel Farage used to complain that he didn't get the Brexit he wanted. Now he seems to be complaining that it's the Tories' fault that Brexit isn't working. He seems to think that those in charge don't believe enough, and if only they did, then UK businesses wouldn't be struggling and they wouldn't be reporting such problems to the British Chamber of Commerce. Here he was on GB News, and frankly this was a bit of a joke.
A survey by the British Chambers of Commerce has claimed that over 3/4 of British businesses say that post-Brexit trade deals has not helped them expand their business in the last 2 years. They're not seeing the benefit of Brexit, apparently. The BCC then went on to present the government with 5 recommendations for improving the agreement, including retaining the use of CE mark, signifying products that meet the European Union standards, and resolving deadlock over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Who best to talk to about this than the man himself, Nigel Farage? Nigel Farage joins me now. Nigel, thank you very much. Look, a lot of people are saying they haven't seen the benefits of Brexit. What's going on?
Well, first thing to remember is that the British Chambers of Commerce was so Remain in the referendum, they even sacked their boss, John Longworth, because he dared to think we might be better off out. So
they were right. They were proven right here. They're complaining about the consequences of Brexit. They said back in 2016, if we leave the European Union, there are going to be pretty bad consequences for UK businesses. And now we're seeing the consequences. And even Nigel Farage is admitting, yes, there are consequences. And you're saying something about how they were Remainers?
I'll just put that in to begin with. However, they have a good point. Because the oven-ready, do you remember that? The oven-ready deal, it's all going to be marvellous. I've signed the best free trade deal you've ever seen. Well,
the one that you stood down candidates for in the 2019 election. You supported Boris Johnson. You were going to run against him, but you decided we're going to stand down a number of candidates in order to help the Tories get their Brexit, the oven-ready deal.
There may be no quotas, there may be no tariffs, but there are all sorts of extra customs checks. There is erratic behaviour by the French, which I think is quite willful. So there are a lot of companies who are feeling some downside. But that could have been more than compensated by the British government over the course of the last few years, making legislation simpler, streamlining it, removing the unnecessary stuff. And guess what? With an 80-seat majority, the Tories have done nothing. And frankly...
Okay, so explain to me how the British government deciding to turn the Great Britain, I should say. And this is a point I want to make. This is something that's never asked of Nigel Farage. Why is Northern Ireland doing so well? Why is there so much investment taking place in Northern Ireland? Why is Northern Ireland doing so well in comparison to the rest of the United Kingdom, with the exception of London? The only parts of the UK growing at the moment are London. London is always growing because it's a centre. But Northern Ireland, I would love for somebody to ask Nigel Farage that question. But back to the main point here. He said here that, it's the British government's fault that... explain to me how the British government, which decided to turn Great Britain into a third country, can fix the fact that the UK is a third country. Because it's a third country in respect to the EU. So there's nothing the UK government can do to streamline the process or reduce the paperwork. Because it's paperwork required for trade with the EU. The EU are the ones who decide. Now, Nigel Farage wanted a harder Brexit than the one that Boris Johnson delivered. He wanted a no-deal Brexit. He wanted tariffs imposed on trade. He wanted something much more difficult for UK businesses, which he's never called out on, of course, apart from people like myself.
In economic terms, business isn't feeling the benefit that it could. There are some firms who are finding global trade easier than it was before.
Who? Now, if you're trading with the United States and you leave the EU, well, you're not going to be really all that much affected because the paperwork is going to be the same. Now, there are issues about tariffs or quotas and stuff like that that are a part of a trade deal. But when it comes to the bureaucracy, nothing is going to really change. But who are these companies? It'd be great if we could actually list some of them.
But for most companies, they're saying, look, this was our chance to get a British government on the side of British business, and they've done nothing. And so what you've got is, let's be honest about it, there's a growing sense of disenchantment with Brexit.
I wonder why. I wonder why people are disenchanted with Brexit all of a sudden. You know, businesses were told by people like Nigel Farage that, don't worry, when we leave the single market, or he didn't really mention the single market, he said the EU. When we leave the EU, everything will be wonderful. And they're not going to impose restrictions on the UK because they need us more than we need them. Do you remember that? Remember how Farage dismissed all this sort of concerns that experts had as project fear, as scaremongering? And now he's pretty much admitting, yes, there are problems. But he's not apologising. He's not coming out and saying, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have lied to people back in 2016.
Not because of Brexit itself, because of the absolute failure of this Conservative government to deliver it. And what it tells me is actually they never really believed in it.
Well,
Who? Boris Johnson? Liz Truss? Well, Liz Truss, you could sort of say that because she jumped on board the Brexit bus as soon as the vote came in. But you had Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak is a Brexiteer. Rishi Sunak has never said Brexit was a mistake. Rishi Sunak was campaigning for Brexit in 2016. What is the criteria for believing in Brexit? Is there anyone in the Conservative Party that Nigel Farage believes in Brexit?
well, I was going to say, isn't it? Because they never really believed in it. And what happens now, Nigel? Because with the best will in the world, people like yourself dedicated a huge amount of time and effort and energy to making Brexit happen just as a thing in terms of the vote. And to see it now, the full potential of it not being reached, I mean, that must smart a bit.
What potential? Remember, Nigel Farage wanted a harder Brexit, a more difficult situation for businesses to operate in than the current one that Boris Johnson delivered. Talking about streamlining and reducing paperwork and stuff like that. Once again, this is about the EU's decision to impose these restrictions on third countries. And they said, if you leave the single market, these are going to be the consequences. And what was the response from people like Nigel Farage? Project fear, scaremongering.
What it does, and it isn't just the full potential not being reached, but it's that feeling that gradually we're going to sort of ease back towards single market rules.
Why? Why is there this feeling that businesses will push the government to ease back into single market rules? Because Europe is its biggest trading partner. You trade mostly with your neighbours. Now, either Nigel Farage doesn't understand this or he's pretending not to understand this. Look at any country around the world. Most of the trade they do is with their neighbours. The United States, most trade is with Mexico and Canada. If you look at countries in Asia, Australia and New Zealand, most of the trade they do is with their neighbours. The UK, most of its trade is with its neighbours. So if businesses want to continue to trade with the European Union, then they need to align with European standards. But as we've heard before, countries around the world that actually don't trade with EU member states understand the value of EU standards, and they're replicating those standards in their countries. This is something Brexiteers never talk about either.
Which means we will have lost the ability to become more competitive globally. And it's by being competitive that you create jobs and an increase in overseas trade. So, yeah, I mean, look, if The Guardian were to poll me today, they'd have me down as one of those people very disappointed by what the Conservatives have done with Brexit. So, Patrick, I just don't know where we go from here, but I don't see Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak, frankly, doing anything to get us back on the right course.
What is the right course? Now, of course, when Nigel Farage talks about Brexit, delivering Brexit, he's talking about deregulation, removing protections for the environment, for workers, for product standards, removing all of these things, allowing businesses to do whatever the hell they want, to hire and fire people as they wish, to reduce protections for the environment. If businesses want to pump toxic chemicals into rivers and lakes, that should be their prerogative. That they should be allowed to do whatever the hell they want, as long as it's maximizing profit. This is what Farage believes in. It's not about protecting British businesses or industry. He wanted a harder Brexit than the one Boris Johnson delivered. There is no getting away from the reality here. Brexit is bad for businesses. Businesses that are trying to trade with the EU are being forced to close down, to hire staff in order to complete this paperwork, or to move their operations into the EU. And who benefits from that? EU member states, not Britain, not British businesses, not British taxpayers. And Farage, once again, not admitting any mistakes here, not admitting that he had lied to people or any form of contrition. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.